Hey everyone, this is Xero and welcome to ROO in a nutshell. Now this is a video that a lot of you has been requesting since the longest of time, and I have been a little bit delayed in releasing it due to multiple reasons, upcoming tournaments and whatnot. And also I had to re-render and recompile the entire video because the original version of this thing took about 7 hours of raw footage. So I thought that it would be best for the audience for a more compiled version of the entire thing, because it can get very heavy in terms of the information being shared, and there was a lot of examples and a lot of real world situations or scenarios that may not apply to everyone. So I thought it would be best for me to make this into a shorter, more compact video for everyone's understanding, and hopefully this will make it clearer for everyone in what I'm trying to say. So again, thank you all for waiting so patiently for this video. I know it has been a while since the last one, so there's a lot of repeating information, but also a lot of new information here as well. So I hope you guys can learn a thing or two from this. Now, if you don't want to watch this is, I'm projecting it to be at least an hour and a half to nearly 2-hour video. So if you don't want to watch this, there is an express option for this. If you don't want to understand all the mechanics, if you don't want to understand all the nitty-gritty details about Ragnarok Online Origin, you can sign up for a service that I am providing to all the viewers out there. It is a paid service, unfortunately, because my time is a little bit limited, but I can provide testimonies that to show that it is worth it. So in terms of character building, in terms of future proofing, in terms of advanced building, there is a difference between both of them. And also, for in case you want to compete in Valhalla Arena, I do provide services to build your characters in all of those. Or you can just join the Discord as well. I will drop the link in the description so it's easier for you to join the Discord, where I'll be sharing information about Ragnarok Online Origin as I find them as well. So if you don't want to go through this video and understand all the details on how to build a character, you can always just sign up for one of these packages. But hey, we're gonna start off with the basis of your character, which is what is your character being made of. Now, there's a lot of stats that you can find in game which might confuse you if you are just starting out the game, or even if you're a 2-year veteran at this point, just because of the amount of stats that you can see in your character page. It can get very confusing. Now, Ragnarok Online has always been a game of mathematics. It's always about plus, minus, multiplications, divisions, about whoever's number is higher than your opponent's, than whoever you're trying to hit or you're trying to survive. So Origin takes a lot of inspiration and a lot of mechanics and a lot of maths from Ragnarok Online, the classic version itself. So there are a lot of things that do apply here, but there are also a lot of ROO specific stats and mechanics that do not apply to any other version. So you might be familiar with some of these, but some of them might be completely new to you. So I've broken down your character to 5 distinct parts, right? This is not, while most of the information is either data mined or heavily tested, this is something that this is a classification that I've found the best way to explain all the stats, how much they affect your character, and the importance of each. So I've broken it down to 5 parts essentially, right? You've got your layer 1 stats, your layer 2 stats, layer 3 stats, crit damage layer, and the final damage layer. Now we'll be breaking down what each of these layer includes and how much they affect surviving in terms of a character, and how easy is it to increase those stats, and so on. Now, layer 1 is the most important layer. Basically, the stats there affect basically everything because it's the base. right? If you have a building, the base is always the most important. The foundation of your character is the most important. Layer 1 is basically your foundation. Layer 2 is built on top of the foundation. It improves on your foundation if your foundation is solid. If your foundation is bad, layer 2 doesn't really help a lot, because again, most of the Ragnarok Online Origin formula is multiplicative, right? So if your base is bad, which is if your largest number is bad, everything else that follows will be bad. If you're familiar with trigonometry or algebra, you know that the larger the number is, when regardless of how large the number is, if you're multiplying it by a negative value or a negative percentage value, all your numbers drop. So it doesn't stray away here for ROO as well. Then you've got your layer 3 and crit damage layer, something that in this current meta, as of this video today, which is on the 25th of December, in the current meta, crit damage layer is of the same importance as layer 3 stats. Now, if anything changes in the future, the importance might be a little bit more skewed, but at the moment it is basically the same, just because the sources that you can get crit damage is very little, but also the cap for the crit damage portion is also not very high, so it is still a very good stat to increase. Now, final damage layer is the least important, just because the relationship between all the final damage layer stats itself is additive, so you'll know a little bit more about it later on. Now, what is in layer 1 stats? Layer 1 stats are the foundation of your character, the basis of your character. It is the size stats, race, and PDef, MDef, your physical defense or magical defense stats. We'll just call it defense, right? We'll just call it defense, just not to confuse anyone. Now, the formula of the interaction between these three is as follows. You can try and understand it, or you can don't. But in a nutshell, each of these stats is capped at 0.9, or in another way, it's capped at 90%. So it can go either 90% increase or a 90% decrease. So whichever is higher, right? If it's negative, it's still going to be capped at 0.1. If it's positive, it's not going to go past 1.9. Okay, and we'll talk about defense a little bit later on, but in terms of size and race, I don't know why there's an element written up there. But in terms of size and race, it's very simple. If you look at your stats, you already have a medium or small size, or large size, damage, and reduction. Same thing with race. You've got your brute, you've got your demi-human, you've got your ghost or whatever, right? All of these stats are capped at a 90% difference. Now, they are directly they directly affect each other in terms of similar stats. So from a defensive standpoint, it will be your reduction against your opponent's damage versus demi-human. Same thing with medium. Now, if you are a Doram, if you are a small size and your attacker is a normal player, which is a medium size, then it gets a little bit more confusing, but it's also actually the same thing. Now, if you're a Doram, and if you're a Doram calculating for defender, you would take your damage reduction versus medium to go up against your opponent's damage versus small. Now, it does get a bit confusing at the start, but it is actually basically the same thing. Now, there's a lot of calculations involved in terms of optimizing these two stats or these four stats, but we'll just call it size and race. There's some calculations being taken into account in terms of optimizing these two stats, but in a nutshell, for the defender, you want to stack up on one. You want to stack up on whichever is higher. Not true anymore, because now in the previous video, in my first video, that you could see that I've heavily prioritized on stacking medium, just because back then in 2000, early 2025, there wasn't a lot of demi-human or racial reduction stats that were available in your costumes or anywhere else. Now that has changed. Now a lot of costumes have been introduced to the game that it is viable to stack up demi-human as well. So what I would say the best way to optimize these stats as a defender is that you want to have a benchmark, a minimum benchmark of both, right? You need to know the people, the players, your opponents that you are playing against, what are their average stats for both demi-human damage and medium damage. Then you want to have higher for both. Now, in Frontera servers, the rough average for demi-human reduction, if demi-human damage, if someone's not really focusing on demi-human damage, is about 150%, 140 to 1%. For medium, it's about 220 to 250% for average. There are people who are really min-max and are focusing very heavily on both, and they will bypass you regardless what happens. There are also people that don't really care, and that's why their demi-human or medium damage is very bad. So you kind of want to find the average, or in a way, look for someone who you are always facing, or someone similar to that power level, and try and find out their stats. That's the best way for you to optimize this, because there are situations where you are actually capping yourself in a certain stat. For example, I have 350% medium damage reduction. Not a lot of people are going to break through that. So for general survivability, I actually reduced my medium damage reduction and increased more of my demi-human reduction, just because I already have too much medium, right? For certain people, or for some of you who might not be able to achieve that, who's not able to achieve, breaking through or surpassing your opponent's stats in both regards, then you want to focus on one. You want to focus on the one that you can push the highest and the one that has the highest difference against your opponent. For example, if I don't have turfing card on my shield, if I don't have turfings at all, or if I don't have Eternal Empyrean, which is the costume that gives the most medium reduction and or medium damage, I would want to focus more on demi-human, especially with all the new demi-human costumes being provided right now. If I have 2 Tara Frogs, which are very easily achievable even for a free-to-play player, and I can push my demi-human to 220%, and if I can push my medium to 230%. Now, previously, if you followed the previous video, you would think that, hey, my demi-human is still lower than my medium, so I should still push medium. No. It's because most people's medium damage is about 150 to 170. Now, if you can push your demi-human reduction to 220, that means that you would have a 50% difference compared to your opponent's damage. Now, if you're pushing your medium, which is what we said, 230% earlier, if you can only push it to 230, and your opponent can have 220% medium damage, for example, that would only mean you have a 10% increase, 10% reduction from your opponent. So that is why in that situation, pushing demi-human might be more beneficial to you. Now, this stat will also affect what food you eat in terms of milky jelly versus maraschino cherries. Now, if you're pushing demi-human, obviously you would eat the demi-human food, which is maraschino cherries. If you're pushing medium, that would be milky jelly. Right? I provided some calculations on how the difference between stacking works. You would see that stacking on one, whichever is that will provide you the largest difference, will matter more than trying to balance both. You can use the calculator that I will provide in the link as well, but it's a very well shared calculator out there. You can probably ask around and probably get the same link to calculate your medium and demi-human damage or reduction and your opponent's size and race as well. So this applies a little bit differently for if you're calculating as a DPS, because now in terms of a DPS, if you are a DPS, you want to bypass your opponent on both. right? You want to have higher demi-human damage and medium damage compared to your opponent's reduction. Now that is a little bit easier said than done, right? But the best case scenario is that you have higher than your opponent in both regards. Now what if you can't have higher than both? Then you actually want to have as close as the opponent's reduction as possible for both. If you can't bypass both, it's actually it depends on how much you can bypass if you stack on one versus trying to match up on both. So for that scenario, you would need to calculate based off of your own attack stats versus your defender's defense stats. Now, I won't go too deep into this. You can calculate it with my calculator as provided in the description below. So I'll leave that for you to tinker around, to play around with, because there is no perfect number. There is no optimum stat. Obviously, the higher the possible, but ultimately it boils down to you needing to really understand your opponent and your character. So having that calculation will help you decide which of these stats to go for. All right, next up is another tier 1 stat, layer 1 stat, which is defense. Now, defense, we've been talking about this since the dawn of time. This formula is actually data mined from the game itself, so it is as accurate as it can be. But here you can see what it takes into account: raw defense, your opponent's raw ignore defense percentage, refined defense, and equipment defense percentage, and also base level. Right now, equipment defense percentage is a very weird thing, because if you put it in the calculation, it actually matters a decent chunk. It matters about 10 to 20% of damage reduction. But in reality, after different testings of all the variables, we found out that equipment defense percent does almost nothing. It's actually not worth to really focus on equipment defense percent, just because of how little or basically nothing in terms of the returns that it gets, because it doesn't affect certain damage multipliers. So with that regard, I'm going to disregard equipment defense percentage completely, because it almost makes no difference. Now I'm going to show you an example on like the calculations. Now this is calculating a certain stat and calculating the difference, as you can see, between 55% equipment defense and 155% equipment defense. Sorry, 205% equipment defense. And you can see here the difference is substantial. It's about 8% difference, but in reality, after both these differences in a real world testing, it actually mattered reducing your opponent's damage by 1,000. Not 1,000, not 1 million. It's 1,000 damage difference, which doesn't make sense. So I'm just going to disregard equipment defense percentage completely. All right. So this is how you calculate your raw PDEF and or magic defense. You take your equipment PDEF found in your stats and divide it by whatever your equipment PDEF percentage is. Now, something that we didn't really focus on prior in the previous video, because there was just so little sources of refined defense, is of course, refined defense. Now it is possible for everyone to get to plus 25 equipment, right? And in plus 25 equipment, that is where you can find the most equipment damage, or the most refined PDEF or the most refined P attack. Now, refined PDEF caps out at about 600 something if you are using it caps out at 576, I believe, if you have plus 25 on everything. So you can find that stat in your, it's 576 refined P physical defense and 276 refined magical defense. Now, if you have both, if you have everything at plus 25, you will reach those stats. It could be lower if you're using a 2-slot shield, a lower refined shield for your refined defense. So you have to take that into account if you are debating between using a one-handed shield or a two-handed shield, because you are losing refined physical defense. All right, we've I've also extrapolated the stats to find, you know, what's the benchmark versus and the reduction in terms of defense and what you would get if you increase, you know, if you continue focusing on your defense. Now, the graph on your left is when we take into account a high ignore PDEF percentage opponent, which is right now gunslingers, which can reach 60 to 70%, rangers, which can reach 100%, and guillotine crosses, which will usually reach 80%. Now, this graph is based, the graph on your right, on your left, is based off of guillotine crosses ignore PDEF percentage. Now you can see the increase is very small, and it actually tapers off. It actually stops after a certain point because of the denominator that is your base level. Right now, everyone's base level is at 140, so it does cap off at a certain point, which I've calculated it to be 467. That is where it caps off in terms of increase. That's why you don't need too much stats for if you're playing against non-GX. You only need 500 more than your opponent's defense, because it does cap off at the current level. Right, against a GX you can go up to 11,000, just because remember, they are ignoring 80% of your defense. They are ignoring 80% of your defense. So you need a higher number. You need a higher number to be able to bypass, to be able to reduce the percentage, equipment defense percentage. So it is calculated to almost about 11,000. So keep that in mind. It does there is a minimum that you have to reach, just because of how the numbers work. You have to reach the minimum. If not, you're not able to reduce any damage at all from the defensive layer. So most people are running about 8,005 to 9,005 right now. That's why you want to be slightly higher than that. Most of the people I've seen are rocking about 9,000 to 9,002 in terms of physical defense. So you want to be higher than that. In terms of magical defense, it is basically whatever number you recalculated before, you divide it by 3, you get a rough idea of what magical defense the requirements you need. Now, most people are running 2.2 to 2.4, so you need higher than that in terms of your magical defense. Right, sources of EDEF and MDEF, most of it are coming from your enchants. There are some coming from your feathers if you use Soul Feather as well. Justice Feather from your Sacred Libra, from your Nexus as well, and also card collections. All of these things do add up. So if you focus on everything, you can find yourself reaching 9.5 pretty easily. If you're lacking in that department, it could be from one of these parts that you don't have EDEF and or MDEF in. All right, closing that out. What's layer 2 stats? Layer 2 stats are secondary stats that amplify upon whatever your layer 1 stats have achieved. Now, I put into this P damage, M damage. Of course, that's the most common, that's the most obvious stat that a lot of people have been increasing, and but it is showing to be a lot less important in the current meta, especially with all the new new mechanics being introduced. So P damage and M damage, while still being an important layer, is less important than it used to be. Same thing with melee and range damage reduction, element skill damage, and damage to player. Now you can see the formula as below. They are additive to each other. That means they affect. That means they cover for each other or are improved when you can stack up upon what is most commonly known as damage reduction. You know, you have, if you're a melee attacker, your P damage is added upon your melee P damage as well. Now, this was true up till a few patches ago, where new mechanics have been introduced. At the moment, element skill damage and resistance is actually taken out from here. It's actually not part of this equation anymore if you have the new mechanic, right? I'm not gonna go down to I'm not gonna explain too much on a new mechanic because one, it is while it is easily achievable, it is not I mean, is not easily obtainable, and also this serves as a little bit of a competitive advantage. This will be shared to the whoever is subscribing to the package, the services that I've shared earlier on. But in purpose of this video, and also to keep this video more easily understandable, that will be omitted from this video. All right, now all these stats are same, basically the same, right? They affect each other, they are additive upon each other, and in terms of reduction, it's a little bit more complicated. Melee damage will only be counted against the melee damage reduction, but because they are additive, because all of these are additive, they are going to affect each other regardless. So yes, this is a bunch of your layer 2 stats. These stats are also capped at 90%. So even if you have 10,000 P damage reduction and your opponent has 500, you're only capping that at 90%. So there is a argument about, you know, what is too much? What is too much reduction? What is too much damage reduction that you can get? It depends on, obviously, the field, what is the opponent's P damage or M damage that they can get, and what you want to achieve is 90% more than that. So most physical classes get up to 800 to 900%. Usually I see them about 800%. So 900% is what you want to achieve to reach the cap. Now, if you are magic, it depends on, again, magic class. If you're a warlock, usually if your opponents, if talking about warlock reaches about 850 to 900% M damage. That's the number they can reach. Sorcerers can reach about 900 to 1,000%. Sunos reach about the same 900,000% M damage. So it depends on the attacker, the class of the attacker, and how they build their character. So with those numbers in mind, you can sort of find the bare minimum you need and what is too much, right? Royal Guards and Sunos typically have too much if they even just focus a little bit on it. So, but other classes tend to have the bare minimum. So you need to calculate what's your peak, how much you can reach, what's your opponent's peak, and sort of find out what you're missing from there. All right, what are layer 3 stats? Layer 3 stats are all the new fancy stats that you can see in the game right now that are if you come from a Ragnarok Online background, you would not have seen these stats anywhere else. But they are in the game. They are still affecting a lot of the portions of the game, and that's why it's very important to understand these stats. Now, there are a lot of layer 3 stats, in fact, and it's actually very difficult to really increase or improve on those stats, just because of
the scarcity and the paywall behind all these stats. Now, a few of these stats are easier achieved than others, and you will know the sources of them if you've been playing the game. Now, class armor is everything you see, like damage versus alchemist, damage versus thief, damage versus priests, and so forth. Those are class armor types, right? You can get them from your mount. You can get them from certain costumes. You can get them from Nightingale accessories. You can get them from your trove as well. So those are class, and your nexus as well. So those are class armor reduction, class damage types or reduction. Armor is what is referred to as well, basically armor, right? You've got your leather, you've got your mail, you got your heavy, and you've got your cloth. Those are armor types. So wherever you can see having those specific wordings, you can get them in your accessory stats, your accessory affixes. You also can get them from your trove as well. Steel damage is something that you can find a lot in costumes or certain cards, but they are, at the moment, they are in a weird place because they don't have a direct counter. There is not a skill damage reduction counter. So that, whatever skill damage increase you get is basically a flat increase. But ultimately, in the end, because in layer 3, all of these stats are additive, regardless of how much skill damage you get, it is still reduced by everything else. So it is not a big it is a decent multiplier if you can get them in your costumes, but they are not the end all be all. They're not the most important thing. They are not the biggest effect to your damage output, right? It is the biggest effect is still your layer 1, then your layer 2 stats. Fashion damage and resistance, same thing as above. It is whatever you can see that says fashion damage or resistance coming from your mount, coming from certain costumes. Rune coin damage and resistance mainly comes from your Nightingale. So there are, if you look at your Nightingale's stats and affixes, there are a lot of increase and decreases in terms of rune coin damage and resistance. So that is where that comes from. Now they are all additive to each other. They're not multiplicative. So even if you have a negative on one but positive on the other, it will still total up to a bigger number or smaller number. But they affect each other linearly. So even if you are losing out on one, it doesn't. It's not as a big of effect as losing out to size or race reduction or damage. Right, and finally, the final layer. What is final damage type? Right, final damage type is stats that affect each other, but they are multiplied on top of everything else that we've talked about. Right, from your layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and crit damage stats. Right, and your yeah. So final damage, there are a few stats that affect that. There might be more that will be added into the game in the future, but at the moment, these are the 4 primary final damage stats that you can find. Non-status damage, title, which is the difference between your title and your opponent's, PvP, and soul force. Now, 3 of these, the first 3 are self-explanatory. The exact amount of the reductions is already being told to you. This is capped at 40%. PvP is also capped at 40%. Sorry, I think title is capped at 25. If I'm not mistaken, let me just make a quick check. It is capped at 20%. Sorry, not 40. This is capped at 40%. 20%. PvP is capped at 40. Right? And Soul Force Mastery has essentially no cap, but in terms of in terms of the feasible amounts that you can reach, there is a soft cap in a way, but it depends ultimately on what your Soul Force Mastery versus resistance is. Now, final damage is basically added up to, it will multiply whatever your after calculation of your layer 1, 2, 3, and crit damage, it's multiplied on top of it, and they are directly affecting each other, damage versus reduction, and then added up with each other to get a final number. we're talking about the cap for PvP stats. It's capped at 55%, and that is of course at its peak. So the most whales they can cap at about 22,000 PvP damage. Reduction they can reach about the same if they only focus on reduction. If they are trying to balance both, then usually we see about 19 to 20,000 reduction and 22,000 damage. That's the ceiling that it can reach. Now, with that in mind, now that you know that, if you're trying to survive against a whale who has that amount of damage, you know that just with this table, you can know that, hey, if you can't reach 500 within 500 difference, which is the largest difference, it is better to just ignore PvP stats completely, because the amount that you can get in terms of the reduction does taper off. The first 500 is the biggest reduction or damage increase. Everything else is less bang for its buck, so to speak. So so it's very common to see a lot of high tier supports actually running 14,000 PvP damage and focusing on other stats instead. This is the main reason why. All right, because it's already the decrease you can get. It's not worth the specific slot, I would say, that you are sacrificing PvP stat for a different stat. So it's much more reduction to go for a different stat. Obviously in some equipment slots or some stat spots that you can only get PvP reduction, then of course PvP reduction still would give you a reduction. But if it is a slot where you can get multiple different slots at multiple different stats at, then it might be better to go for that different stat. An example of this is in your Nexus, for example, 500 PvP reduction versus a class reduction, versus 5% class reduction. Once you figure out this stat, you would know that, hey, going for a class reduction might be better compared to going for PvP reduction. All right, now this is a relatively newer stat that has become the forefront in recent times, just because of the abundance of classes that crit. You've got your Royal Guard, you've got your Doram, Magic Dorams, you've got your GX, you've got your Night Watchers. All of these classes do crit, and now we have an additional layer that we can reduce their damage upon. Now, crit damage is of course directly affected by crit damage resistance, right? Every character that crits has a base crit damage of 150%. So that is the multiplier on top of your base damage. So if you were doing 1,000,000 damage, if you didn't crit, you will be doing 1,500,000 if you crit. Now, when you take that into account, you need to multiply that into account as well. So you can see me giving an example, taking into account that GX roughly has 80% crit damage, right? If the defender has 0% crit damage resistance, the total damage increase will be 2.7. This is the final total damage increase, which is 270%. Now, if the defender has 100% crit damage resistance, you will see that the number drops drastically and actually goes below the base crit damage. So it is you would see a big increase in terms of crit damage, in terms of damage reduction, if your crit damage resistance is higher than your opponent's crit damage. Even if it doesn't, you will still find the decrease affecting the overall total output. So for example, if we were to calculate a 50% crit damage increase, that would put this at 1.3 times multiplied by 1.5, which is about 1.65. So just by having 50% crit damage increase, you would have already reduced the opponent's damage by 100% just by having 50% crit damage increase from this base. So that is why it is important now to start paying attention to crit damage resist percentage. Sources of crit damage resist percentage comes from your enchants, from your armor, shield, shoe, and cloak slot. Rangriff, the Divine Armament set also provides a 50% crit damage resistance, and certain costumes do provide crit damage resistance as well, so something you have to look out for. Alright, sources of P damage reduction, this is already covered in the previous video, I'm not going to go in too deep about it. Alright, and we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk a little bit about this new sigils. There's a new sigil that has been released since the previous one. This is from a previous video on how all of these stats work with each other. We're going to talk about the new latest thing, which is Galebrick. Now, Galebrick is absolutely broken, right? It at level 35, which is, well, Galebrick 3, it provides a 35% damage taken, non-status damage taken reduction stat, right? And the only requirement is for you to be moving for 2 seconds, which is very easily achievable. And it lasts for 10 seconds with basically a 5-second cooldown. So the uptime of this is 66% uptime for Galebrick. And if you compare that to Fearless, now you have a 80% final damage, non-status damage reduction. Now, if you can put both of these together and you get insane amount of non-status damage reduction, really essentially preventing being one hit. Now, why Galebrick 3 and not Galebrick 4? It is because Galebrick 4, if you get hit while it is active, you actually lose the effect if the damage you receive is over 20% of your max HP. You lose the effect immediately and you gain move speed. So while Galebrick 3 just gives you a near permanent 35% damage reduction, a non-status damage reduction. So Galebrick 3 is one of the best sigils right now. You would want to get it to level 3 to use it. Level 24 is enough. Everything above it is just bonus. You don't want to get it to 36. You don't want to max it out. If it's maxed out, it is not usable, right? But once it is level 3, you can stop it right there, and it is already one of the best defensive orange sigils out there. All right. Yeah, this is just additional explanations upon what are the classes crit damage percent that they currently have, so you can have an idea of what base crit damage rest you need. Now this is 3 stats, 3 reduction if you have 0%. So every increase of this gives you more and more reduction. And it is still capped at 90% for the decrease portion, but for the increase there is no cap, so that's why they can go super high crit damage rest. That is also why in PvE, for a lot of the crit classes, crit damage percent increase is the biggest damage increase that you can get, just because there's no cap for that. All right, after talking about all these different stats, I'm gonna talk about a little bit more specific about each and every character. Right, it's what I call the theory on the theory of individuality. Right, different people have different stats. That is a given, just because of different resources, different spendings, RNG even coming into play here. That if you just copy someone else's build, chances are it is not going to be the most optimum build for you, just because that is not what your stat allows you to build in the most effective way. Now, easiest example is taking into account size versus armor type reduction, right? For for most people, they'll think, hey, size, no brainer, right? But no, it is actually depending on your character. If you have 2 brute affixes on your accessory, and if you have the scarecrow mount from the previous Baphomet booty, which provides all armor class reduction, then you can actually bypass your opponent's armor type reduction and get a negative value there. Now, this usually applies to classes with no shield. For example, Wanderers. Wanderers, they have a tough time building size and race just because of the lack of shield. So the best option for them is actually to go for armor class, in terms of stats, then they would rather have all armor type Bane compared to damage reduction versus all size. Now, same thing, we talked about the same thing very early on in this video, talking about size and race reduction as well. So this is basically building upon that, right? Really expanding upon that. It is ultimately you have to really optimize your character. You have to understand what your character is good at, what resources it has, and the best way to build it is to amplify your strengths on that character. For example, my character, because of me having Eternal Empyrean and of course having Double Guardian as well, it does not make any sense for me to move out from size reduction, because I can reach 380, 400% size reduction on my character, right? But for certain people who, for example, don't have Turfing, don't have Empyrean, or if they are a super novice who does have demi-human reduction stats, or if you have Lazuli Oath, then it makes more sense to build demi-human, right? So this is the theory, right? That you have to amplify on what your character's strengths are, because that is the most optimum way to min-max your character. Okay, going away from the data mine stuff, now leading more towards the more anecdotal experience or personal experience in building my own character, building the members' characters, people who have signed up for membership or coaching, or even the players in my guilds. Knowing after all this experience that I have over, I think it has been over 300 people that I've been teaching one way or another, that the most optimum and the most balanced way, this is for DPS by the way, this is the most balanced way to build your character in regards to costume and sigil, is what I like to call the 5+4. You don't want more than 5 offensive or defensive at the same time. So you don't want, for example, you don't want to have 6 offensive. You don't want to have all 5 of your 6 offensive, then everything in your sigils being offensive as well. You're just going to be a glass cannon. And something that I've always been saying is that, dead DPS deals no DPS. Now, if they're gonna die in one hit to someone a lot weaker than them, then they're just going to be dead weight, right? So this takes into account the costume sinks as well. So if you are most commonly for sigils, people are running either 3 defensive or 2 defensive sigils. Now, with that in mind, if you're running 2 defensive sigils, that means you need 3 defensive costume sinks. And if you're running 3 defensive sigils, that means you only need at most 1 defensive costume sink. Or if you want to be a bit safer, you can go for 2 defensive costume sinks as well. So there are some costumes which are kind of a mix of both, right? You've got your Eternal Empyrean, which is 30% damage and also reduction. You've got also things like Synforged Mass, which also gives reduction. Those are counted as 0.5. Such as things like Violet Vow as well, they are 0.5. Book of Oath is is just counted as full offensive. So it depends on what costumes you have, and if you keep this in mind, the 5+4 formula, you find yourself able to balance both offense and defense together. Now, if you tilt either way or the other, you will find yourself lacking in damage or lacking in survivability one way or another. Right. Now, one of the latest, the newest stats that a lot of people, some people know, some people don't, is Soul Force Mastery and Soul Force Resistance. Now, this was not covered in my previous video because the numbers weren't apparent. They weren't made clear to us whether data mined or tested. But now they made it very clear that the difference of Soul Force Mastery versus Resistance divided by 81 equals to 1% final damage. Right? And this applies to all damage, not just Soul Force damage, but also your normal hits, your skills, not just your Flame Arbiter or whatnot. So there are essentially 3 ways to balance this stat out, to really optimize this stat out, right? One way is you can go all in on Soul Force Mastery, which means that you go for 2,900, for example, Soul Force Mastery and having 0 resistance. That's one way to build this. This means that you are reducing 0% from anyone's Soul Force final damage. So if someone has 2,000 Soul Force damage, they will be doing a bonus of nearly 25% to you. But you are doing also the same amount to them, assuming that they have 0% Soul Force resistance as well. The second way is to balance it, like in a way that I've done it here, right? Obviously, as a DPS, you want more Soul Force Mastery just because you want to do damage, but you're not going all in on Soul Force Mastery. You're putting in some resistance so that you can reduce a little bit of the final damage provided in this stat alone. Or the final way, which is what most supports are doing, they are just focusing on Soul Force Resistance. Now, this will put them, depending on tier, depending on how much you spend, obviously, you can have 1,500 to 3,000 it's capped at 5,001 right now, I believe. If you have everything maxed out, all the Soul Force Resistance crystals maxed out, obviously that is the ceiling of it. But yeah, like this is a stat that you need to really optimize. You have to decide based off of what you have in your costumes, your sinks, everything else, your base stats. Then you would know that, hey, my base stats in terms of reduction are a little bit low. I need to pump that up more. I can do that through Soul Force Resistance. Or I'm very tanky already. I can build more damage, then I can just go all in on Soul Force Mastery. So ultimately, this applies back to the theory of individuality. You need to know what your character is good at, what's the weaknesses, and then you can know how each and every part of whatever I've talked about so far, how all these small parts can fit together to make a robust character, right? And next, this is a little bit, again, leaning in towards the theory of individuality and also talking about knowing your opponent, right? If you are playing against opponents that are equal level, right, then PvP stats matter a lot more, right? For example, if I'm fighting against someone who has the same PvP stats as me before I change anything, right? If I'm 17k, I'm fighting against someone who is the same and we are of the same level, then the Sigil set on the right actually does better than the left. Can you believe that? 4 red sigils losing out to 2 purple, 1 purple, 2 orange, and 1 red sigil. Right? This is just because all of our stats are almost the same, that I will get more getting the PvP reduction. Now, it is very unlikely that there is, a lot of scenarios where this fits, but there are scenarios where this will help you out. For example, in certain tournaments where they cap out in stats, right? This will help you out in the same level tournament. This will also help you out in Valhalla Arena, Aha, because everyone has similar stats. Now, you can keep that in mind now as you build your character in Valhalla Arena. But if this probably could apply to the newer servers as well, where people are more or less the same stats. So keep this in mind, that relativity is knowing your opponent is half the battle, and if you know your opponent, you can know what's the best way to counter them. All right, going into Nightingale. Now this is a very loosely talked about thing that you are basically hearing it here first, right? This is the first time you're probably hearing it, and this is achieved through weeks, months of testing, and to find out what's the best Nightingale fixes. Now, defense wise, it is a no-brainer, right? In terms of defensive Nightingale, right? You have to have sustain and initiative. Now, initiative is already or self-explanatory, especially if you're running a high shield build, I would say. Right, there are a lot of materials that provide shields, and if you're running high shield builds, then it makes more sense. It makes absolute sense for you to go for initiative, right? It doesn't make sense for you to not have that, because that's just free 10% final damage reduction. Now, you can, for certain classes, you can go double initiative as well. If you're not one of the classes that are easily bursted, double initiative makes sense. Now, if you're easily bursted, that is where sustain comes into play. Sustain provides you huge damage reduction when you are when you take burst damage, right? That usually comes from GX or someone stronger than you. If you're looking to survive if you're looking to punch up in terms of survivability, then you definitely need sustain, right? For the defenses, for the supports Nightingale, it is a lot more nuanced, I would say, right? There's almost no reason right now not to run the Seraphic Halo set, because Seraphic Halo does share across everyone, not just in your own party, but everyone near you. So that allows you to have an insane stacking in terms of just offensive and shelter stacks if you play together in a large party. So that applies to Guild League, that applies to even Dimensional Drill. If you're running 4 supports, then you would find huge value in Seraphic Halo, rather than everyone trying to run what's the other one? Crest of Melody. Right, Crest of Melody is very stack based, and it's very hard to stack if you're being killed in one hit, right? So that is something to keep in mind. I'm trying to find an image that talks a little bit more about Nightingale. I kind of lost it. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm gonna find it very soon. If not, I will just add that on in the Discord. So make sure you join the Discord, guys. Link is in the description. It is free to join, but to access the members only chat, you will need to, well, to access the members only chat, you need to subscribe to the services. But yes, can't find it now. I'll find it later on. But yes, this is what supports should be running in terms of their Nightingale. All right, there are a few things that are not covered in this video. There is additional layer 2 stat optimization. one of the new mechanics that I have alluded on that's not covered in this video. Soul force optimization as well is not fully included in this video, I would say. And there are certain costumes that are, I wouldn't say bugged, but their descriptions are not working like described. Some costumes are better than what you think they are, and this is discovered through a lot of testing. So all of this will be only for paid members. So yes, if you're interested to be a part of it, you can DM me on Discord. All right, so yes, I think that is the end of this video. This is a lot shorter than the original 7-hour video. It's a lot more compressed, but it has covered all the important base mechanics of the game. And it only took an hour. That's a lot shorter than I expected, but I did skip through a lot of the examples because a lot of it has been covered in the first video, and also no Q&A for this video, obviously. But hey, thank you all for watching so far. If you have watched it to this point, thank you all for watching. Thank you for being patient. I know this video has been a lot of people have been waiting for this video for a long time, but I finally got it out of the way. So thank you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something from this. And if you want to find out more about the coaching and services provided, you can of course message me on Discord, message me on YouTube, and we can talk further on. Until then, guys, thank you all for watching. This is ROO in a nutshell, and good luck everyone, have fun, and see you guys real soon. Peace out. Merry Christmas, everyone.